The phone rang in the middle of the night, its sharp sound slicing through the silence like a warning. I blinked at the clock, 2:13 a.m. Beside me, Julia's phone lit up on her nightstand. Without a word, she snatched it, her hands trembling slightly, and slipped out of bed. The door creaked as it closed halfway. I lay there, heart pounding, listening to... For a moment, I just stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe her friend, maybe work. But something about the way she left, so quick, so quiet, didn't feel right. Julia never hid anything from me, not in the 5 years we'd been together. I slipped out of bed, bare feet brushing against the cold floor, and moved closer to the half-open door. Her voice came in faint whispers from the living room. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone, it wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was something else. Something softer. Then I heard her laugh. A small, nervous laugh, the kind she used when she was trying to sound casual. My stomach twisted. "Yeah, I miss you too," she said. The words hit me like ice water. My knees almost gave out. I backed away before she could see me, my chest burning with questions I didn't want answers to. Who was she talking to? Why was she saying that in the middle of the night? When she finally came back to bed, she acted like nothing had happened. She curled up beside me, her breathing steady, her hand resting on my chest as if nothing in the world was wrong. But I couldn't sleep. Not after that. Every sound in the dark felt louder. Her soft breaths, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the fridge. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, while a single thought echoed in my head. Who was on the other end of that call? Her hushed voice down the hall. And that's when I realized whoever was calling at this hour wasn't just anyone. The next morning, Julia acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, hummed to herself in the kitchen, and smiled at me like she always did. Her eyes were soft, her hair still messy from sleep, and for a moment I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. But the more I looked at her, the clearer it became. Something had shifted. She wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She kept checking her phone, flipping it face down every time she caught me glancing. I tried to brush it off. "Rough night?" I asked casually. She froze for a second, then smiled. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." The lie rolled off her tongue too smoothly. I wanted to ask, who were you talking to at 2 a.m., but instead I swallowed it. I told myself not to sound paranoid, not to be that guy. We'd always trusted each other, right? But trust doesn't stop you from noticing things. That evening she took her phone into the bathroom with her, something she'd never done before. When she came out, I heard the faint ping of a notification, and her face changed just for a second. Her lips curved, a small secret smile. That's when I knew I had to know the truth. The next night, after she fell asleep, I reached for her phone. My hands shook as I hovered over the lock screen. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was crossing a line. But love makes you desperate. The phone asked for her passcode. I tried the one I thought I knew. It didn't work. 3 tries later, the screen locked me out completely. My heart raced. Not because I got caught, but because I realized something else. Julia had changed her password. When I looked over at her sleeping face, she looked peaceful, innocent. It made me angry, not at her but at myself. I'd always believed we were unbreakable. Over the next few days, the signs kept stacking up. She stayed late at work. Her phone was always on silent. Once, when I walked in unexpectedly, she flinched like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Then one Friday evening, she got a call. I was standing in the kitchen when her phone rang, same unknown number as before. She froze for half a second, then hit decline. I asked, "Who was that?" "Wrong number," she said too quickly. And for the first time, she couldn't even look at me. That night, when she said she had to go meet a client, something inside me snapped. I waited until she left, then followed her. Her car led me across town to a quiet little cafe on the edge of downtown. Through the window I saw her, sitting at a corner table, her face lit by soft yellow light. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man, tall, clean-cut, maybe in his 30s. They leaned close, talking, smiling, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed. I felt the world blur around me. My pulse roared in my ears. For a long time I just stood there watching from across the street. I told myself maybe it was work. Maybe it was innocent. But the way she looked at him, the way her whole face softened, I'd never seen her look at anyone like that. Not even me. When they stood up to leave, I turned and walked away before she could see me. That night when she came home, I pretended to be asleep. I could smell his cologne faintly on her clothes, something expensive, something that wasn't mine. I lay there in the dark, my chest tight with anger, sadness and disbelief. I'd seen enough to know the truth. Yet I couldn't let go. The doubt that had been gnawing at me finally snapped into something far worse than suspicion, a cold, hollow certainty. It started with an ordinary morning and a glance that felt like a needle. An envelope sat on the kitchen counter, half buried under yesterday's mail. Julia glanced at it with that tiny flicker, the same look she gave before she lied. She fed Lily at the table, back turned, hair falling over her shoulder, humming a tune she always used when she wanted me to think everything was normal. I picked up the envelope like a man picking up a live wire. No return address. Just our last name, Harris, scrawled across the front in heavy, hurried ink. I asked what it was. She shrugged and called it junk, insurance paperwork, the kind of casual lie that leaves fingerprints. When she left the room, I didn't move. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was one sheet of paper, sterile, clinical, and the words that punched the air from my lungs, DNA results. My eyes locked on the table where names and percentages stared back at me like a sentence. Child Lily Harris. Mother Julia Harris. Potential father Ronald Harris. 99.9% probability. The world seared. Ronald, my father. My legs gave out and I slid down the kitchen cabinets, the paper crumpling in my fingers. I read the line again, as if the second time it might undo itself. It didn't. It sank in like ice. I imagined every holiday, every visit, every Sunday he lingered a little too long with Lily, every joke shared in the kitchen. Suddenly they felt staged, rehearsed. Betrayal wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a concrete fact, printed in black and white, and it had been sitting on my counter under the same roof. I didn't confront her that minute. Anger roared, but planning took its place. The first wave of fury would have been self-defeating. I needed leverage, proof beyond one envelope and a battered heart. I needed to see them how they were when they thought no one was watching. So I bought a tiny camera online, hidden, motion-activated. I tucked it into the living room bookshelf where its lens peered out between novels, aimed at the couch where they always sat. Every time Dad visited, I felt like a man planting seeds in a traitor's garden. I felt guilty for setting the trap, and guilty for wanting it to catch them. The camera blinked a single red eye and recorded our life in blunt, merciless detail. For 2 weeks I lived like a ghost in my own house. I smiled. I changed diapers. I played the role of the husband who didn't notice. Inside I counted the hours until I could look at the footage. When I finally locked myself in the office and opened the files, my hands shook so hard the mouse slipped beneath my fingers. The first days were ordinary. Laughing, making tea, holding Lily in that gentle, practiced way grandparents do. But on the 5th day, the day that would burn into my memory, they slipped. They were on the couch, the TV murmuring in the background. Julia leaned into my father, too comfortable, too familiar. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, the way lovers do when no one is looking. She rested her head against him and laughed at something private. Then she excused herself, and as she passed the camera's field, a whisper slipped past my speaker. She's taking too long. We need to figure this out before he catches on. The rest was slow, a film rewound frame by frame. Their whispers, the small, easy touches, the way their eyes softened when the other spoke. It was a language I'd never seen aimed at me. They weren't just lovers. They were conspirators. They'd built a life around my ignorance, and the camera tore the veil away. I watched them plan. I watched my father speak not like a grandfather, but like a man calculating risk. He muttered about covering tracks, about making things seem simpler if I believed he was the father. The footage was a punch through the chest. Proof had a smell, metallic and terrible, and I tasted it on my tongue. The night I decided to confront them, my anger had settled into a cold, precise kind of rage. I needed them to see the damage they'd done reflected back at them. So clearly there was no mistaking it. I waited until Julia left the house, following her at a distance, every nerve taut like a drawn wire. She drove to a worn motel on the edge of town, with neon lights that buzzed like broken promises. I stayed in my car and watched her go inside. When I pushed open the motel room door, the air smelled of stale coffee and cheap perfume. There they were, my father and my wife, too close, laughing like thieves who had finally found their hiding place. For a second, the sight of them together in that small space felt like falling into an abyss. They froze. The easy mask slipped off their faces, and for the first time I saw naked panic. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. Anger had taught me restraint the way a long winter teaches patience, cold and absolute. I stepped forward with the DNA results clenched in my fist and dropped them on the bed between them like a verdict. The paper landed with a soft hiss and then silence, heavy and accusing. "How long?" I asked. The room answered with the kind of silence that has no defense. Julia tried to speak. My father's eyes darted like a man who'd lost control of a machine he built. I said 3 words I'd never thought I'd say to my own blood. "You're dead to me." And then I walked out. I left them there, shaken, exposed, human. I drove home with the camera footage and the test folded like evidence. I filed the first email to my lawyer before dawn, subject line, divorce. I wasn't finished. This betrayal had unspooled a life. I intended to wind it back, thread by thread. But in the quiet after the storm, when Lily slept unaware of the war unfolding around her, an older, smaller voice whispered in my head, whatever came next, I would not let her be collateral. The next morning, the house felt like a crime scene, quiet, heavy, and hollow. Julia moved through the kitchen as if nothing had happened, her hair pulled back, her voice calm, her hands steady. But I saw it, the faint tremor in her fingers when she reached for her coffee cup, the flicker of fear in her eyes when she met mine. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to sense that the walls were closing in. I sat at the table, the DNA report folded neatly beside my phone. My lawyer's number glared from the screen, waiting. I'd barely slept. The confrontation from last night played in my head like a film loop, her face pale and frozen, my father's eyes darting, desperate. They hadn't tried to stop me when I walked out, maybe because they knew there was nothing left to say. Julia broke the silence first. "You didn't come home last night." I looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. "Neither did you." Her lips parted, but no words came. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard, then looked away. The lie she was about to tell died before it could form. For a moment I saw the truth flicker across her face. The guilt, the shame, the fear of losing everything. "I need you to listen to me," she started softly. "It's not what you think," I laughed. It wasn't bitter or loud, it was hollow, broken. "Julia, I caught you. There's no misunderstanding this time. There's a video. There's a test. There's a child who calls me Dad, and I don't even know if that's true anymore." Her face drained of color. You saw the test?" I saw everything. For a long moment she just stood there, trembling, lips quivering like she might collapse. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "It happened once, years ago." "I never meant for it to—" "Once!" I cut in sharply. "Julia, there are recordings. You met him again, and again. You laughed with him. You planned things with him." She flinched like the words hit her physically. Then she broke, sobbing into her hands, sliding down to the floor as if her body could no longer carry the weight of what she'd done. "I didn't know what to do," she cried. He said he'd tell you. He said it would destroy everything. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want Lily to what?" I snapped. "To find out her father isn't her father. To live a lie?" Her sobs filled the room, small and ragged. I watched her crumble, but there was no satisfaction in it. Just emptiness. I picked up the DNA test and held it out to her. "You want to fix this? Start by telling me the truth. All of it." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It happened 6 years ago," she said, voice shaking. "Before Lily was born. Your dad came to help us with the house. You were working late most nights, and I was lonely. We talked, drank a little too much, and one night I made the biggest mistake of my life." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know whose child it was. I wanted to believe she was yours. I needed to believe that. So I never said anything. Not to you, not to him." "And the motel?" I asked coldly. "That was after he found out about the test. He said he couldn't live with it anymore, that he wanted to tell you himself. I went there to stop him, to beg him not to ruin everything. I swear to you that was it. I didn't go there for him. I went there for you." I studied her face. She was shaking, desperate, clinging to every word like it could rewrite what she'd done. But whether she was lying or not no longer mattered. The damage was already permanent. I stood up slowly. "Pack your things," her eyes widened. "What?" "Please, you're leaving," I said quietly. "Today." She dropped to her knees, clutching my hand, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. We can fix it. We can get counseling. We can—" I pulled my hand away. "Julia, there's no fixing betrayal. There's no therapy for a wound this deep. You didn't just cheat. You rewrote my life without asking." Her cries followed me down the hallway as I walked away, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. That afternoon I met with my lawyer. The divorce papers were drafted within hours. Everything moved mechanically after that. Bank accounts split, custody discussed, assets frozen. I told him about the paternity test. He said it would complicate custody, but I didn't care. Lily was innocent. Whatever her biology said, she was still my daughter in every way that mattered. When I returned home that evening, Julia was gone. The closet was half empty. Her favorite mug was missing from the shelf. But she'd left behind a note on the counter, written in shaky handwriting. "I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. But please don't take her from me. She needs both of us. I'll live with what I did for the rest of my life." I stared at the note for a long time before crumpling it in my hand. She wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Neither of us would get what we wanted. Over the next few weeks, life became a series of quiet routines. Mornings with Lily, work that felt endless. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering when the pain would stop feeling like fire. My father tried calling once. I didn't answer. The second time I blocked his number. I heard through my mother that he'd left town. Good. Some absences are blessings, but grief has a strange way of resurfacing when you least expect it. One night, months later, I found Lily in the living room flipping through an old photo album. She pointed at a picture of me, Julia, and my father, taken before everything fell apart. "Daddy," she asked, "why don't we see Grandpa anymore?" I froze. My mouth went dry. I wanted to tell her the truth, to rip the bandage off, to stop living behind half-lies. But when I looked at her small, innocent face, I couldn't. "Because," I said softly, forcing a smile, "sometimes grown-ups stop getting along. But that doesn't mean they don't love you." She nodded, accepting it easily. "Children are merciful like that." That night after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room with that same photo in my hands. I stared at my father's face. The man who'd raised me, taught me everything, and then stolen the one thing I couldn't replace. And for the first time since it all happened, I cried. Not out of rage or betrayal, but out of exhaustion, out of the weight of carrying a truth that no one else could ever fully understand. The world outside was quiet, and inside, the storm finally began to settle. But deep down I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Forgiveness might come one day, but trust was gone forever. 6 months later, the dust had finally begun to settle, at least on the surface. The divorce was finalized, custody arranged, the house sold. Julia had moved to a small apartment across town, and I saw Lily every weekend. Life had resumed its shape, but it wasn't the same one I'd left behind. Every corner of my new place was quiet in a different way. There were no echoes of laughter in the halls, no scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen in the morning, just silence, and for the first time I wasn't afraid of it. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in small, painful fragments. The first time I managed to sleep through the night without seeing their faces. The first time I laughed at something on TV and didn't feel guilty about it. The first time I looked at Lily and felt pure love again, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over us. She was growing fast, her smile still as bright, her curiosity endless. She'd started asking more questions lately. Why Mommy cried sometimes, why Grandpa wasn't around. I never had perfect answers, but I always gave her the same promise. You're safe and you're loved. That's all that matters. Sometimes late at night, I'd find myself standing by her bedroom door after she'd fallen asleep, watching her breathe. I'd think about how close I came to walking away from it all, to letting my anger steal the only good thing left from the wreckage. But she was my anchor, my reminder that the story wasn't over yet. As for Julia, she called occasionally, brief, polite conversations about Lily's school, doctor's visits, birthdays. She sounded different now, smaller, somehow softer. There was no trace of the woman who used to laugh at midnight phone calls or hide secrets behind locked screens. Just a quiet woman carrying the same guilt that I still carried in my chest. I never forgave her, not completely, but I stopped wishing her pain. I realized that punishment doesn't always heal. Sometimes letting someone live with the truth is punishment enough. My father never tried to contact me again. Last I heard, he'd sold his house and moved to another state. My mother wrote once, asking me to make peace before it was too late. I tore the letter up without reading the rest. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat by the window and watched the city lights shimmer in the distance. For the first time in months, the ache in my chest felt bearable, like a wound that had finally started to scar. I took out my journal, the one I'd started the night I left that motel, and wrote a single line at the bottom of the last page. Some betrayals end a story. Others begin a new one. I closed the journal and exhaled, the kind of breath that feels like release. The phone buzzed beside me. A new message from Julia. Just a photo of Lily smiling, holding a drawing that said, "Me and Daddy." For a long moment, I stared at it, my eyes burning. Then, without replying, I saved the picture, because even after everything, the lies, the betrayal, the broken pieces, there was still something worth keeping. Not her. Not him. Just the small, unshakable truth that love in its purest form had survived the ruins. And that was enough.